Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews, and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Welcome everyone back to the Fly Culture Podcast. I don't know if you've been out fishing. I'm hitting the river pretty hard at the moment. I'm really waiting for that pull from a salmon. I got lucky the other day and managed to catch a sea trout of a couple of pounds, which was great. But for a moment, I thought it was that magical moment. But part of it is putting in the hours for those fish, just waiting for that moment to actually happen. And it's interesting. I'm just back from the river now before recording this podcast, and I wrote a piece about my home water and what it means to me. And it's so much more than the fishing. It's the whole experience, who I spend time with, if I'm there on my own. And it's worth a read. If you're interested, it's on the Fly Culture Facebook page. I've just posted it up. This is being recorded on the 7th. So it's just as live of there. But it's what it means and what a home water resonates to me. So hopefully you feel the same about that. And like I say, I'm fresh in from the river, but I'm really pleased to be sitting down talking to Peter Knox today. Peter works at Farbank. But you'll recognise the name more so if you don't know Farbank, if I say that he's a rod designer for Sage. So it's really looking forward to learning a little bit more about what actually goes on in the process of building a fly rod from pretty much from start to finish, but how people feel about it and get a sense of a company that's actually run by fly anglers as well and employs fly anglers as well who are passionate about their fishing as well. So, Peter, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on your podcast.
How's it going?
It's good. You were just speaking to people who are fishy and anglers. I was just thinking that right now I've set up shop near the Henry's Fork in Idaho. Yeah, and I think I have 15 days in a row on the water recorded. And today it's supposed to blow 30 miles an hour sustained or something. So I need to figure out, I want to keep my streak going here after work, but I'll have to figure out a wade spot where I can just give it a go for an hour or two and call it if it's too windy. But most days I've been fishing with friends and coworkers and we've put boats in and floated and done all that. So yeah, I'm pretty good. I'm in trout country right now.
And Henry's Fork's a pretty special river, isn't it? I've stopped on the road from Yellowstone and where it passes over Henry's Fork and looked down there, and I saw a couple of fish rise, and that was enough for me. We were heading, funnily enough, I can't even remember where I was going. I was with my daughter now. I think we were going to try and see if we could find where Rio were or something like that at the time. So we were continuing on the road down there. But Henry's Fork's apparently is an amazing technical river to fish, isn't it? It really is about line control, small flies, and technical, tricky fishing, isn't it?
Yeah, the river has a few different stretches, and each one has a slightly different personality. The best known is probably the Harriman State Park stretch. It's known as the Ranch. And in most of that, the river spreads out really wide and it's relatively shallow. So you can wade fish pretty much anywhere. But it's really popular and the fish, each fish has a PhD. I mean, you need to get a perfect drift. It's really neat though, because first of all, if you can catch a fish there, you're a pretty good angler, I think. We're just really lucky, but you kind of walk up to the water and the fish are in there and you might not know what they're eating, but it's just you and the fish pretty much. There aren't any physical barriers. It's, you just have to go and see if you can get them. But there are other stretches of the Henry's Fork that people typically fish out of boats. I've been spending a lot of time lower down, fishing out of my boat. Same sort of thing. Big fish, dry flies, a lot of sight fishing opportunities. So yeah, all throughout the whole river, it's pretty incredible. And really, that's just one option out of maybe a dozen or so in this area, and it's a beautiful area. So this is a good place to be.
Yeah, sounds it. Is that home for you? Is Idaho where you come from?
No, I come from Bainbridge Island. That's where I grew up. That's also where the Sage factory is. So most of the time I have to be kind of near where the action is. There's a hand-in-hand thing with developing rods and then implementing them and making sure they work and you can screw them together and all that. So that's where I spend most of my time in the Seattle area.
And that's pretty cool as well, I'm told.
Yeah, we have plenty of fishing opportunities over there. Salmon and steelhead and trout to a lesser extent, but it's a pretty dynamic fishing area, both freshwater and saltwater fishing. And the state of Washington has a western region, which is very wet and cool. And then the eastern side of the state is like a desert. And then there's a range of mountains in the middle. So you really can get a full range of fishing opportunities that go, spread throughout the year. So yeah, there's no shortage of opportunities in the Northwest. And I think you probably saw some of that on your trip out here.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, you've just got down, I say down the road literally, but Oregon below. And I know we were talking off mic about that as well. And there's the Pacific Northwest and the fishing all the way down into California as well. And also you talked about saltwater. Would that also be sea run cutthroats or? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Bainbridge Island is right across Puget Sound, which is a body of water from Seattle. And so from Bainbridge, we can fish for sea run cutthroat and salmon. I'm trying to think, 3-4 species of salmon. And it's maybe not the best place to do it, but we can drive to the best place pretty quickly. So yeah, that's definitely an opportunity. And the sea run cutthroat fishing is what I grew up doing a lot of. I grew up a 5-minute walk from the water. So oftentimes, like in high school, I'd hop off the bus on the beach rather than at home and fish till dark and then go home. There's some good sea run cutthroat fishing there, as well as resident salmon, we call them. They're when I was fishing for them, it was typically winter time when they kind of gathered in the area near where I lived, and these salmon don't do a full migration all the way out to the ocean. They kind of hover in the estuary areas. They go out towards the ocean, but they do a mini migration. So they're kind of available year round, depending on the timing and where you are. So there were a lot of good opportunities for me at that time.
Nice. And I kind of imagine, I hope this is the case, and I'm sure it probably is, that after a day at work, does some of you sort of gather together and say, hey, let's go fishing?
Yeah, there's some of that. For sure. I'd say weekends, we're a pretty tight bunch, the whole Farbank group that's in-house. So we do organize trips on the weekends, and we're usually interested in spending a night or taking a whole day to find a really nice experience.
Yeah, that's how I hoped it would be. And is it a big? We're going to come on to the business in a minute, a little bit more of rod design and everything else. But is it? Is there a big team there? Is it a big factory and everything? Is there a lot of people working there?
Yeah, we've got I guess for Sage, about 100 people maybe. And so I'm going to guess 20 to 30 office staff, and then the rest spread throughout. And so, out of the office staff, we're all pretty dang fishy, I'll say. you've got to kind of have a reason to be in the fly fishing business. You have to enjoy the perks to be here. So people stick around if they really enjoy the community and some of the perks, and so that's great. We've got a great team right now.
Fantastic. Let's come back to the fishing then, and how long have you been fishing? Has fishing always been part of your life?
Yeah, since I was little, my dad would take me fishing. That was with conventional tackle. That wasn't necessarily fly fishing. He dabbled a little bit in fly fishing, primarily on trips to Alaska. He took me on a couple of trips to Southeast Alaska when I was 7 or 8 years old, where there were just piles of salmon in the river, and it was pretty darn easy. And so I got a taste of fly fishing then. I was probably like marginally coordinated to be able to swing a rod and all that, but my dad would hook up some fish and let me fight them on the fly rod. And it wasn't until I was probably 11 or 12, something like that, that I took an interest in fly fishing and essentially taught myself. My dad got me a rod, and he knew the very, very essentials, but more or less he put the rod in my hands, and I figured it out on my own, the fly casting part in my backyard. But I had a little bit of sense for things, just from fishing conventional gear.
And so did that lead to a passion once you'd got learning to cast a rod and everything? Did that lead to a passion for you for fly fishing, or was it something that was in the background amongst other things at the time? Or did you immediately know this is the thing for me?
I certainly had sports and stuff, but the whole time I was pretty captured by fishing and fly fishing once I took that up. And so through high school, I worked in the local fly shop on weekends and dabbled in a little bit of guiding. When I was younger, I wanted to be a fishing guide when I grew up. And it wasn't until later that I figured I should, go to school, and I kind of had a knack for math and science and all that. So I was able to wrap some of the engineering stuff into my fly fishing career. So, yeah.
And so you said about being a guide, and you'd thought about it and you'd done some days. How did you find the days that you did for your fly shop as a guide? Obviously, having been a guide for a long time, I'm always interested to hear people's takes on it and what they made of it and whether they enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, I spent a lot of time in the local shops. There were two in the area, and one had a guide business, ran float trips, and so I did some overnight float trips. I guided those on the John Day River, actually, which is one canyon over from the Deschutes. It's about 18 miles away. Another spectacular river, a little bit smaller, but a really neat smallmouth fishery. So anyhow, I was a little surprised to find out how much guiding is about people rather than fishing, believe it or not. And yeah, that was that kind of that was a bit of a shock to me. So at the time I wasn't sure I could do that what I did for the rest of my life. Now I think I'm a little bit better equipped to handle people, and I'd love to do a little bit of it, especially just commenting to some friends earlier this week, just being out here. There are these little outdoor towns and where there, a lot of the business is guiding or fly shops, and it does kind of make me feel like I'd like to spend a summer or a year or two, just being a fishing guide, being on the water every day. Sounds pretty good to me. But
Yeah.
at the time, I wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to do forever.
I think you made the right choice, but it's fun to do, and I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think sometimes people don't realise, and I've said before on these things that it's a service industry job, and I don't think a lot. I don't think some people realise that's the case, and you got to get along with people no matter what, no matter how bad a day you've had, how bad things might be in the background. You just got to smile and give the people a good day, which is what it's all about, really, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And some people have a knack for that, and I may or may not. I'm not sure. I
There's
didn't
one way to
fully
find
test it
out,
out. Yeah.
So you said at school math was a key thing for you, and it sounds as though engineering was a line that you were going down. Was that where you were with that, and you felt that's where you wanted to go with your career, other than guiding, obviously?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like designing things, building things. I think I've got a bit of a creative side to me. So, yeah, the engineering, in particular, mechanical engineering, is the path that I took pretty on once I was in college. Uh, and that's about the time after my first year of college. I'd been applying to Sage for a summer job in the factory for years, actually, 2 or 3 years. Um, and they finally took me on for a summer job after my first year of college. So that was pretty neat. I was in the factory rolling blanks, seeing how it all comes together. So I got just a super good education on how you actually make this stuff, which has proved helpful.
And so, first off, I guess you must have been like a kid in a candy store, um,
Yeah,
seeing that
just
kit.
I mean the sight of so many fly rods in one place. We keep a lot of rods in sets of say 5 or 10 on these little rolly carts, and as later in the process, as the rods are going through the stages of assembly, the cork gets put on there and the guides, all that. It's the carts get lined up, and you just see these lines or small clusters of many rods, and so that was a pretty spectacular sight at the time. I got pretty used to it, but yeah, I really enjoyed uh, seeing stuff made from the beginning to the end, and just seeing what was on the inside of the rods.
And I guess everything there is built there. So you're seeing, as you say, from the very rolling the graphite all the way through to putting it in the tube ready to go out, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. All our rods are made on Bainbridge. We get graphite in sheet form, so nearly raw materials. What we get for our blanks as a raw material is called a prepreg. It's a pre-impregnated graphite fiber, and it's got the resin, the sticky stuff in it, and it's sometimes very, very thin, like a couple thousandths of an inch thick. Um, well, it's all thin. It's all a matter of thousandths of an inch. But we end up wrapping that around a steel rod that's tapered, and then curing it and pulling it off, and you have a tube essentially. But yeah, everything's made on Bainbridge, and yeah, we basically get raw materials and send out finished rods.
That's pretty cool, isn't it? So how did that journey go from a summer job to the job that you actually have now?
Um, I was pretty eager to, just meet everybody in the company, know the players, that sort of thing. So pretty quickly, I got tied in to the product development group at the time, and they were kind enough to let me work little overtime after standard shifts, doing gathering data, working on some small projects. And by the time I was ready to go back to school in the fall, they offered me a kind of a once a week internship type thing. So I went to college in Seattle, and I was close enough that once a week I'd might go over to Sage and kind of work a 3/4 day, maybe a full day, depending on my schedule. And I continued that most of the way through, well, all the way through school. And that was my foot in the door to come on board full time with Sage as a designer.
That must have been a pretty cool moment, particularly as you knew the path that you wanted to take with that and who you wanted to work with. And I guess that there's a lesson for everyone out there and younger people as well, that you can, if you want something enough, apply yourself and find yourself in that right position as well. And, kudos for that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely fortunate in a lot of ways. Just being where right place, right time kind of thing. But yeah, I tried to put myself in the right position to progress towards where I wanted to be.
Cool. So let's look at a rod. Let's say you've released a rod. Let's use the Lightline, for example, because I want to talk a little bit about that one, which is a really interesting route. But say you've released that. When does that process start to look at the reintroduction of that current rod, as it were? Is that I guess that's a 4 or 5 year process that you're immediately starting? Are you, once that rod's in production, are you looking at the next thing?
Yeah, I'd draw a comparison between our flagship rods and then our other rods. Our flagship series are usually kind of the core fast action next generation type rods. They incorporate a new technology usually. And so just identifying that technology, testing it, proving it out is a big milestone. And once we have that figured out, then it's a game of crafting actions for other rod families. And so the whole process we describe as a combination of science and art. And so for a big effort, the science comes first. We're looking out 4 years-ish to identify new technologies. And that usually is enough time to find one or a handful of things that'll make our rods significantly better than in the past. We're always shooting for that honest 10% better in materials and performance. And so if we can get that, and we feel really good about our testing, we do a lot of in-house testing on mechanical testing devices. We feel pretty good about the rod family. So we kind of prove out the science side and then take it into the art side, which is understanding fisheries and the lines that are going to go with the rods and the flies that people want to throw, and all the casting distances, and then creating an action from that feels really nice and performs well.
So how long will it be until you actually have a prototype ready to start playing with? So you've identified the material that you want to use. How long will that process be? And will there be many tweaks within that process that you say, well, this is a little bit this way, or it could be this way? Will you run a number of prototypes?
For sure, yeah. So the materials, call it a 3-year process. Sometimes we find dead ends. Sometimes it's more. Sometimes it's a little bit less. But it is years to kind of follow all those paths. Once we have that, the action side does take a lot of iterations, and we do have some software that gets us in the ballpark of where we want the parts to be from a flex and feel standpoint. We have 4-piece rods now, exclusively. I think we have 3-piece. The Dart's a 3-piecer, but the parts have to all work well together. You need a nice smooth action. They also need to fit together, which is more of a constraint than you'd imagine. And so our software can get us kind of in the ballpark, call it, I don't know, 70% of the way there. But then it's a game of having the parts in hand and feeling them and casting them and fishing them. At Sage, we do have a dock behind the building, where I spend quite a bit of time just assembling parts, swapping them out, feeling how they cast with a variety of lines. And so that process can take many tries, to get a final action that feels really nice and smooth and how I want it to feel. And sometimes it's a little bit quicker, but it always takes probably a lot more iterations than most people expect.
And did you find if we come on to the resins, the leap from Generation 5 to Kinetic to Kinetic HD, that between Generation 5 and Kinetic was quite clear in how the blanks were a lot thinner, lighter, yet stronger. And then with the HD again, and the word I keep coming back to, and I'm lucky that I cast a fair few of your rods, and I own a lot of your rods. I've been a long time owner of them, but the smoothness and feel, particularly latterly, seems to be something that translates to me continually when I'm picking up those rods. Was that a conscious effort with that? And having somebody who's owned a TCR as well, that was seen as the ultimate stiff rod. That I fished with as well, but now the difference seems to be that smoothness in the casting stroke and the feel that you're getting back from the rod. Was that a conscious decision to go that route with the Kinetic and Kinetic HD?
Yeah, I think that's a combination of materials and action, but that's definitely what we were going for. I think we haven't necessarily been driving towards like the super most lightweight rod as a focus. We've been more thinking about feel and how the rod communicates to the angler, what's happening, and then also just making rods that perform in a variety of situations and handle a variety of lines. So there's a lot out there to target, and yeah, feel is definitely one of the biggest parts of the equation.
It's interesting, and you talk about lines there as well. And my default, and I always try and say to people, if people have a fly line arm, be it, and Rio come under if our listeners don't know, the Farbank group, Rio come under that as the fly lines, my default will be to go to a gold, but then I will try the other lines on there. But in that process, I guess that's where you start. But do you look at lots of other lines as well, for just to ensure that your end user may not have a loyalty, let's say, to Rio, but may use another brand? Do you try a bunch of different lines on there just to see how they fit and work as well?
We do, yeah. The gold from Rio's been in line for many years. It's the gold standard, so to speak, and so that's a real nice benchmark for us because it hasn't changed. It's kind of steady. But we do try a variety of rods depending on the application. A really nice litmus test for a rod that we do is to take a 5-weight, for example, throw a 4-weight line on it, see if the rod casts a 4-weight line pretty nicely. Throw a 6-weight on it, see if it casts that pretty nicely. If you can hit, the target, and then on either side of that, you have a pretty good rod. Some of our specialty rods are designed for musky fishing, saltwater fishing, the extremes, and those have to cast heavy shooting head style lines. Some lines on the market now are particularly heavy, overweighted, they have short front tapers. And so depending on what the rod has to do, we have really easy access to a variety of lines. So, I usually just get everything and throw all sorts of lines on a rod, and flies are part of that equation too. You kind of have to try out all of the different scenarios.
The thing I can picture is your office, instead of in workplaces where people go out for a smoke, they'd go out for a cast instead, I guess, at Sage, instead of a smoke.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, our casting dock is a pretty popular place around lunchtime, but at pretty much at all times. Actually, it's a little bit annoying for me because, sometimes I have to be out there and I'm trying to get some stuff done, and I've got a little path around the back of the building, and so I can poke my head around the corner of the building, and more often than not, somebody's standing on the dock, and I hate to kick people off, so I usually just head back in and do a few more emails or whatever, and then find some time when I when I'm free to think and I don't have to chat or anything out there. I can be by myself. So.
And do you have those situations where you take a prototype out and first cast, you think, wow? Or is it the engineer in you that wants to make sure it can, and I guess it must be, but you want to make it as perfect as you can make it for the marketplace. But are there situations where you think, wow, I think we've got this almost there straight away?
I think the wow is more like, wow, there's an inkling here. And it takes a little bit more time for that to gel and ferment and evolve. It usually is a wow, but, wow, but this could use a little tweaking here. Wow, what if I tried this variation, that sort of thing.
Yeah, interesting. How many, when you've built a rod, that process of building it, how long does that tend to be? How do you turn those round from the moment that the graphite's wrapped to it being put into the tube ready to be shipped? How long does that process actually take?
That's a really good question. I think if you gave me 12 hours, I could probably, and my life depended on it, I could probably make one end to end. So maybe it'd take me a little bit more than that, but that's not the most efficient way to do things. So we kind of make the blanks on one side of the building, and that incorporates a couple cure cycles that are, cure cycle can be several hours long. Probably the most, yeah, I think when people visit, we do offer tours every day. When people visit, they're usually surprised by how hands-on everything is. Everything's handcrafted. There's very little automation at our facility. And so everything from, rolling the blanks to wrapping the guides is handcrafted. But for sure, the wrapping of the guides and the coating of the guides is the biggest chunk of time from that perspective. So.
And one of the things also in the UK is I know some people get super excited about the quality of the cork, and I think you sourced some or somebody to handle the cork and sourcing it for you 3-4 years ago. That really is high quality, isn't it? I've been super impressed with how that the rods and the finish generally, but the cork on the handles has been amazing as well.
Yeah, 10 years ago, we did pull all our own cork rings on the rods, but we did switch to this supplier that's just fantastic. When we were bringing in our own cork rings, we, would get a certain volume, and it was pretty nice cork, but this new supplier that we have brings in even more cork than we did, and they have a higher ability to sort. So they may be taking all the premium cork that we were getting and dividing that up into several classes of cork quality. So that's been a win-win, really. They have some fantastic capabilities. The other thing they do, which is really neat, with their preformed grips is when we finish a blank design, we'll send them the butt section of the rod, and they have equipment to taper the inside of the grip to the exact specification that we need. And so depending on the taper on the blank, they'll have an exact mating taper on the cork. So when you slide that thing down, it's like perfectly meshed and mated with the blank. And we hardly even need glue. I mean, for a prototype, I'll just slide a handle down, jam it down onto the blank, and the fit is so nice and consistent all the way through that I usually don't have to glue a grip unless I want the rod to stick around for years, but that's been really nice because a lot of the grips out there are, if you've built rods yourself, shimmed out in some form or another, or the rings are bored to, rings are just a little bit funny. They're held together by glue, so to have that sort of almost mechanical fit in addition to the glue just provides really nice feel and contact throughout.
Yeah. I wanted to come on because I thought this was really interesting last year that you re-released a range and the Lightline, and I'm old enough that I owned one of the original Lightline rods that I liked very, very much. And, I used to look out for the classic, the 893 or 8'9" 3-weight. That used to make big money on eBay and places like that when I was looking. I had the 9 foot for a 4-weight. How did that come about to ignite that range of rods and bring those back again? Was that because that's a pretty tough ask as well, isn't it, to old timers like myself as well who know the original and love the original? How did that process come around?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, our newest moderate action rod is, the full name is the Trout LL, and it's in a lot of circles become known as the LL or second generation, whatever. But that name sort of encompasses the spirit of the rod, in my opinion, because it's one, an all-around trout rod, and then two, it has ties back to the LL, which is quite old at this point. But looking back at the LL, I think that was a rod. I didn't design that one. I believe that was a Dawn Green design. But that was a rod at the time that I think was designed to feel really lightweight. Swing weight, it was a moderate, maybe even a medium fast action. It's a pretty quick rod, but it's really just feels light in hand. And so, that was a benchmark for the new Trout LL. And so the Trout LL takes that lightness in hand, but then, puts it in the modern world where lines are much more diverse than they used to be. I think people are looking to do a little bit more with their rods, at least in this part of the world. There's a lot of focus on nymph fishing with bobbers. And so not that I would particularly recommend that rod for that style of fishing, but the new LL does handle a more diverse set of scenarios.
Yeah. There's, like you say, feel, and I've talked again on these podcasts, and I've been fortunate. The one I have, I've caught some nice fish relative for our neck of the woods with it, and its ability to play those fish, and that's something I keep talking about now as well. That the way to being able to subdue with the blank the fish as well as cast a nice line, that's become more and more of a mantra for me of late, and that does it phenomenally well. And as I said, I have the 8'9" for 3. I had a friend down, you'd know Warren, actually, you met him when you were over, but he bought a 9 foot for a 4, and we fished that last Friday, and that was beautiful as well. Really nice. I'd call it a good dry fly, dry dropper rod, and is absolutely fantastic at that. But it was a really interesting, and I guess a risky one, to in effect, not re-released because you redesigned it, but to bring a much revered rod. And I really feel you guys pulled it off.
Thank you. Yeah. Just getting back to that 9'4", I was fishing that one last night, and I hadn't fished it in, actually quite a while. But we were floating the Henry's Fork, and we had some really nice dry fly fishing, and so we put a technical trout on that rod, and I was reminded how much I like it. So yeah, that was pretty fun to just revisit that action for me. I see enough different models and that sort of thing that it's nice to have that just kind of affirmation, that it's a great rod.
Yeah, no, it's been interesting seeing, because you've always within the range had rods that will do, the 7.5 foot for a 3, a 9 foot for a 4, whatever it may be. But to have these offshoots now, like the Dart as well, which I'm hoping and praying you named after a stream in my part of the world called the Dart. I'm sure not for 1 second it was, but I always think it is. And obviously Simon is from the same neck of the woods that I am, so I always hope in the background that it was, but I can't imagine it for 1 second. But
that's an awesome coincidence. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's one of our it means a lot to me, that stream as well. So it's been kind of cool to fish the Dart on the Dart, which has been really, really cool. So it's been interesting seeing those little offshoot specialist rods come through, and the ESN as well, which I think that has been dialed in now, isn't it? And that rod for me is one that is absolutely spot on now for nymphing, and I use that, and I've subdued. I think when I hook fish on that rod, I know they're going to stay on, and I can really play them, and they're going to stay. I think that action as well is perfect for tight line nymphing, euro nymphing, whatever you want to call. Is that way you sort of, and with the growth in the US particularly now, with you looking at that, it must be a good growth market for you as well, mustn't it? Tight line nymphing and euro nymphing.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that grow in popularity. I think probably the opportunity to just catch a lot of fish captures a lot of people. I personally don't fish that way a ton, but I've done quite a bit of it in the past, and I think it's pretty fascinating. It's more dynamic than dry fly fishing, I think, because you're not only dealing in 2 dimensions with the surface of the water, but the depth factor too. And it is deadly. Sometimes I'll fish some nymphs just to see what lives in a certain stretch. If they aren't coming up for a dry fly, I'm always curious where the fish are sitting. Are they behind a big rock or on the edges or that sort of thing? So yeah, that action continues to be a really high performance action. We designed that one kind of partnering with some of the guys on the US competitive fly fishing team. And we're always looking ahead to what the next best thing is. And that's probably one of the more dynamic markets or just places, because I think it's driven by the competitive world. I think we're seeing some opportunities to improve that in coming years, but I'm really happy with the action of that rod. It's still, the rod that I would pick up to spend a day doing that tight line nymphing.
Yeah, absolutely. People ask me, here's a question for you, what my favorite issue of the magazine I've released, and I can't answer. It's like sort of, not that I've got 2 children, but answer, choose a child. Is it similar for you for the rods that you've been involved with? Is there one that you're particularly proud of that you like the most, or you're the most proud of? Is there one in particular?
Yeah, like you said, it's tough. I like all different rods for all sorts of different reasons. In general, I do like our I call them premier Sage rods, the high price point rods. Those are the real opportunities to drive be on the leading edge of performance. And whether it's an all around fast action rod that's got to do a little bit of everything, or a specialty rod with a very narrow focus, I enjoy the challenge of both of those, project goals. And I'm not sure I could choose any one rod at the moment that I'm like, super happy with above all the others. I think they're all really nice and great to fish in different scenarios.
Good answer. That's exactly what I say about the magazine as well.
It also helps that I can fish, I can pick up any one of those rods and take it fishing. So I have a pretty big quiver to choose from.
Yeah, nice. When you've got those rods ready, or they're about ready, you send those out to test with people out in the field, I guess, as well. So that process, the testing process, you're using it, the guys there are using it, you're casting it, fishing it a little bit. Then that goes out into the field, I guess. And are you sending prototypes out, or pre-productions, and are they tested and you're waiting for feedback there? Or is there a feel that you want to get it to market, or do you want to make sure it's tested thoroughly before it comes to market?
Yeah, for sure. Ideally, I'd prefer to do all the fishing and testing myself, and go to all the places. That's not always an option, and so yeah, some of the, particularly in fisheries where we aren't, across the world, or can't get to very often, we do have some select product testers, and those are people that we've developed relationships over the years, and just know we can get really good feedback. You can't necessarily send a rod to anybody in the world and expect to get constructive feedback that helps take the rod to the next level. But we've got a good number of people who can and do that. So Don Green, who founded Sage, even before Sage, was designing rods for his company Grizzly and Fenwick, and at the time a lot of the blanks were kind of made separate from rods. So companies would develop blanks and then usually send them to a different company that would assemble the rod. And so Don had the opportunity to design all these, different projects for different companies, design the blanks for companies, and design rods, blanks, actions for all sorts of different fisheries, mostly domestic, I think, at the time. But so from the beginning of Sage, our designers were focused on traveling around, experiencing different fisheries, and just having a sense for what the rod has to do. And so we've continued that. To this day, I do have a lot of opportunities to go places, but it's a big world out there as far as, covering the bases. And so we are fortunate to have some really good product testers, and people that we can bounce ideas off of, and make sure the rods are durable too. Nothing beats time in the field for durability. And so just having that rod in people's hands for long periods of time, and some people do wacky things with rods, so it helps to know that the rods are going to hold up. I think our rods do a pretty nice job in those heavy duty saltwater environments. So we do have a good handful of product testers out there.
I did a podcast with John Hazlitt, who I know is one of your ambassadors, and he sniffed me out. I never say what I did or what I was involved with, but he sniffed me out within minutes and saw that I was fishing X's and things like that. And we pulled over the boat at one stage and just started casting and talking about line and rod combinations. And he said, "Look, I've got this set up. What do you think?" And it was just fantastic to be able to talk about stuff like that, which I love doing with friends here as well. But it was as I know that you know him well, that it was quite fun to actually do that and talk about geeky stuff that's really interesting and about how a rod performs and the subtleties within choosing that line and everything else. So yeah, I guess he's probably given those a pretty good workout for you too.
That's great. Yeah, John's a wealth of knowledge, and he's got that memory for all the little details of how long a head is. I can never quite remember. Is it 18 or 19 feet? It depends on the grain weight. I mean, yeah, he's great. I like talking to John.
Yeah, his 5-way X double hander setup was I just barely could give it back to him at the end of the day because he had it just perfectly set. And I keep meaning one day I'm going to probably treat myself to one of those. But it was just fantastic. And it was really good fun talking about those subtleties. And they really do make a difference. Getting that line combination with the rod really does pay dividends, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Particularly in the two-handed world, people are pretty focused on that. And there are a really wide range of lines that you can put on those rods. Everything from the super short Skagit head that might be 12 feet long. If you're going for like a little trout spay head that's super short, to the long belly stuff, which is 80 feet long. So yeah, it's pretty. That's part of the fun is getting the right line on there for how you want to fish.
Yeah. Now, I've just, changing subject a little bit, I've just been writing a review for the Fly Culture webpage of the new Sonic rod that you have. And that comes in mid for the Sage Rain, mid price point there. It was really, really interesting casting it. And I was a fan and was deeply sad when the Axel went away. I think it's linked with memories of fishing it in some great places as well. And it's the sort of rod that I could put in the back of my truck and leave it there and it would be fantastic. But this rod, I guess, in effect replaces that. But rather than being a midpoint rod, this appears to me to be a higher end rod at a cheaper price. Was that a conscious decision to do that? And what I mean by that, and I know we chatted a little off mic about it, that the finish of the rod, the cork standard, all those other associated things, was that where you were looking to go with that?
Yeah, for sure. That was it exactly. We wanted to take that premium feeling for the product and bring it to a lower price point. Yeah. So I think I mentioned before, it's the action, it's the finish of the rod, the handcrafted quality, all the way to the packaging, the bag and the tube, which we've typically reserved an aluminum tube and cloth bag, both made in house at Sage, for a high end rod or the highest end rod. Now we've put the Sonic in that thing, and it just feels like just a high end premium rod all the way through.
Yeah, no, I'm fishing it a lot at the moment and really, really enjoying it. So it was a really, really good job in that. And I guess that's a way for you guys, and I know you've always had lower to mid price range rods within your range for a number of years now. Do you find that's a way to build loyalty to the brand earlier on in a fly angler's development?
That's the idea. Yeah. I think we've gone even lower price point than much of our competition as far as rod makers in the U.S. and that's always been our goal, is to get somebody hooked on the brand, so to speak. If they have a great experience with a $500 Sage rod, hopefully the next time around they consider the $900 rod. So yeah, hopefully that's paying off.
And do you find, I guess, knowing, I guess, a little bit about your customers and things like that, and I've been a long-term user of the rods, so I do have a loyalty for 30 odd plus years, however long it is now, it's a long time. Do you find people stick with the brand? So you have long-term users out of the rods that have always used the brand?
I hope so. Anecdotally, I hear a lot of people who say, I've been using Sage rods for my whole life. Or I do hear a lot of that sort of thing. I don't have any data, any data to prove that out, but I do hear it.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I know, as you know, when I've stood on stands and things, people always love to tell you the rods they've owned, and rods like the XP obviously has that cult status as well, and they'll tell you how much they've enjoyed those, and it's very, very interesting to see. But let's take a different tack now. And you said your Farbank and Sage within that are based on Bainbridge Island. There's another company over there, Boeing. Is that a coincidence? That you're located close to somebody like that?
Just a little bit, actually. In the super early years of actually before Sage, Sage is actually located in a building that was inhabited by Fenwick, and so Fenwick was a premium brand at one point in time. Don Green was a big part of that company. He actually moved Fenwick at the time to Bainbridge Island, away from a little bit south of Seattle, because Boeing was down in that area. Actually, Boeing as a big company offered a lot of great benefits at the time, a lot of job opportunities. So they'd actually steal Sage employees or Fenwick employees in a way. Yeah, they'd kind of get trained in the composites world, and then they'd jump somewhere else where they could get great benefits or a higher pay kind of thing. So back then, we moved away from Boeing. Now it's been a good area because of just that history and the composites world. There are a lot of companies based out of the Seattle area. Some of those companies supply Boeing or other aerospace manufacturers, and so we're able to leverage that. It's really nice when we can walk over or drive over for the afternoon, visit some of these companies that are making materials or technologies, and just have a conversation. Nothing beats the face-to-face contact. Maybe not even the video conference or whatever. So that's definitely one of our advantages, just being where we are.
Yeah. So tell me, we've talked about some of the rods and things like that, and the testing and the building and the process behind it. How do you feel when that new rod hits the market? Or are you at this, you're so well prepared, having field tested it, having tested it yourself? Are you nervous when that new range actually launches, or do you feel you're relatively comfortable with what you expect people to say about it because you've done so much work on it?
Yeah, by the time a rod launches, I've probably been working on it for like a couple of years. I'm always thinking ahead, just based on our development times and all that. Looking ahead a couple of years, and so I'm kind of on to the next thing, honestly. When a rod launches to the general public, there's a little bit more of that angst when we launch products to dealers or just show off like the first prototype to folks around the office or people that we know. A little bit earlier on in the process is when there's a little bit more of that going on. Yeah, but by the time everybody sees it, I'm thinking about something else personally.
Yeah, and you mentioned about you were on the river last night casting a light line or trout light line. Do you get to travel? I think you alluded to it earlier. Do you get to travel a fair bit to try these rods out? And I guess if that is the case, that you want to do a lot of saltwater rods then.
Yeah, totally. I wish I could do more of that style of fishing. Well, all fishing, but I do really like the saltwater flats fishing. Yeah, and I do get to travel quite a bit. I'm spending a month in Idaho right now. I usually have a good handful of saltwater trips every year. Yeah, it's one of the perks of the job, but it's also necessary, I think, to experience all the different fisheries and see how things are developing. Really, fly fishing is a slowly evolving sport, or not so slowly in some cases. Preferences change, the way people are fishing changes, all that. So it's important that we stay on top of that.
It's interesting actually why you've mentioned that I've said in many of these podcasts that in the UK they're saying there's fewer people fishing, but my belief is that we had a spike in the 70s and 80s of the still water, the reservoir boom, and that age group is fishing a little bit less. They're getting older. So what you're seeing is a flattening of that spike. And I guess your spike must have been around 91 when the film came out.
Mm-hmm.
And that must have been, are you seeing a similar sort of thing? Or because to us in the UK, and we, you know, to me, the fishing in US is still super cool. Scandinavia is super cool. UK's seen slightly differently. I'm trying everything in my power to let people know actually some of us are, living that similar sort of lifestyle and feel the same way about fishing. But do you think there's a similar sort of thing there, or is there growth in it? How does fishing feel to you?
I guess there are a lot of surveys out there, and I think if you look at the large surveys, fishing is largely flat. I'll say that. Those are pretty general surveys. They don't get into the nuances of fly fishing and all that. So I don't know how much weight they hold. My perspective is that, trying to think, I kind of see both ranges of it. I mean, I see some people who, kind of age out a little bit, so to speak. I mean, people who aren't, who get older and aren't traveling across the world and rowing boats down, heavy whitewater and all that. But then I see kind of a new generation of anglers who, particularly in certain regions, the state of Colorado, fly fishing seems to be pretty hip and cool. And then, another example would be in the Bend area in Oregon. I see a lot of guys on the Deschutes, younger guys who are like skiers, snowboarders, and they say, yeah, during the summer, I like to come out here and swing flies for steelhead. So, God, it's tough to say. I mean, I'd say it's maybe flat, Yeah, I think there are maybe maybe people are traveling more. Yeah, I, I don't know that it's declining or growing a ton, but I do think there's a little bit more movement of people. Uh, out on the Washington coast where I fish for steelhead a lot during the winter and spring. The last 5 years, I think we've seen a lot more folks from Montana, Idaho, Oregon come over. I don't know if the reverse is true, that people are necessarily going to the Rockies and trout fishing more, because that's always been a huge destination, I think, for people across the world. But certain fisheries, I mean, steelhead seems to be more popular than it used to be, or there's an appetite for that at least. Redfish is another species that just pops up for some reason. It's grown in popularity. I'm sure you probably can think of some fisheries that are like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting when you say about the steelhead, and having said that, I've travelled over to do it a few times, because it does, and it is fascinating to do. And I wonder if it is the spey casting aspect of it that has brought more people into it. It's so poetic, it's so beautiful, it's a really cool way to catch fish, and I wonder if there's more of that. And I get signs we're a little different, that people are veering towards the other species that you guys have been fishing for, and we've been doing a lot of it as well for a long time, but you see these little spurts of interest and activity, and it might be carp, it might be pike, it
Hmm.
might be mullet, it might be whatever it is, and you see these little things, and my hope is always that that will bring people from the gear fishermen or whatever across into fishing. So actually there's another way to catch these fish. And yeah, well, I remember Sage did a spinning rod years back, didn't they?
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Whoa. Seems like every few years we think about doing something like that,
Mm.
a gear program, sometimes just as a backup rod. If you end up on the flats and it's super windy and blowing hard, at least you could um, present, something to a fish. Um, but yeah, hopefully we're getting some crossover in those specialty fisheries. One that comes to mind is the muskie fishery. I think the lines have blurred a little bit between the conventional and fly fishing worlds. Just that people are throwing ginormous flies. I mean, over here, well, you have the same thing, don't you, for pike? Maybe not quite as big, but some of these flies are just ridiculous. I mean, they're like this. So the question is, are you throwing the fly with the weight of the line or not? And is that fly fishing? And that's a philosophical debate that we don't need to get into.
No,
But
I've just, funnily
yeah,
enough, I've just been reading John Gierak's latest book, No Shortage of Good Days, I think it's called. And I've just finished reading a chapter. I'm trying to ration myself bits of it so that I don't read it in one go. But he was talking about musky fishing, um, and these huge 20-inch flies, or huge great, and it sounds absolute water hauling to get the fly going, and sounded really exhausting for our listeners who don't know what a muskie is. I guess the nearest thing we have is pike, really, isn't it?
yeah, for sure. It's a big pike.
Yeah. Yeah, they sound huge. I think, is it 50 inches is 50 inches and above is a trophy, or I think that's what he was saying, something along those lines.
Yeah, if you get a 50 incher, that's a darn good fish. Um,
Mm.
yeah,
But yeah, that sounded interesting and exhausting in in a bit too much for me these days, I must admit. I'm just reading about him fishing in Labrador for char now as well, and 6, 7, 8 pound char on. I assume they're swinging spay rods and stuff for those there.
yeah. The muskie thing is exhausting, and I think it takes a certain angler to really be drawn to that. Um, so yeah, it's cool. I really do appreciate when there's a little culture or niche or fishery where um, we get to think about designing a rod, how you'd go about that. Some of those extreme cases do uh, kind of push the boundaries of what we're doing and help us just think about rods in different ways.
Mm, interesting. So we've gone off on one of my rabbit holes. Sorry about that. We talked about the destinations that you go test rods in. What is your favorite destination that you tested a rod on, and was it memorable for any particular reason?
Um, Boy, I'm trying to think. So far, you know, um, I think tarpon fishing in the Keys is just a pretty incredible sight. I mean, just to take it all in, you go out to the ocean side out front, you can see strings of sometimes hundreds of tarpon, and they're so big you can see them from way far away. I mean, just to take that in is pretty incredible. Um, oh, here's one. The Dean River is a pretty special place. That's the one place for me where I got there and I just really felt like I was in a spectacular area. And of course, you can't get there by mistake. You have to fly in or boat in to that river. But it is loaded with some steelhead that are known as some of the hardest pulling steelhead in the world. It seems like people either mention the Dean River steelhead or the Thompson River steelhead as ones that'll just test your equipment. So yeah, it's hard to pick a favorite. Every place is unique and special.
So what would be your dream destination? Where's the place that's eluded you that you would love to go fish?
Probably the Seychelles. I've done Christmas Island and really appreciated the variety of species there. I really fell in love with triggerfish. They're really challenging, but on Christmas Island they're numerous, and they're easy to see. So you can see them from a long ways away. You take your shot. More often than not, they don't eat your fly for whatever reason. They like to spook and all that. And so it's, that place is the combination of triggerfish and GTs, which I don't get too crazy about GTs compared to some people, but they're really neat fish. Bonefish, of course, as well as other species. I think the Seychelles are probably just sort of the next level or a higher level, maybe a higher level experience than Christmas Island, which has, been a mainstay for a long time, at least for us, because it's relatively easy for us on the west side of the U.S. to get there.
Yeah, they're an interesting one. You've got the milkfish, I guess, as well, which sound kind of, again, that's the salmon angler in me, that something that's ridiculously stupid to try and catch, but you can do it, can't you, I believe?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of milkfish experience. On Christmas Island, you see smaller ones on the flats, and you can mistake them for bonefish. If you just kind of see a shadow or movement, you can end up throwing your fly at them for way too long before you realize what you're looking at if you're not tuned in. But then you can go a little bit offshore there and into deeper water. And for whatever reason, there are some bigger milkfish that get up right on the surface of the water, and they just like open their mouth and they cruise the surface, just skimming algae, I guess is what they're eating. They're plant, they're vegetarians. And so, yeah, you can go out there and it's pretty cool to see all those heads just kind of swimming around, and you can try to drift your fly in front of them. With it, you can have some success there, and then they pull way harder than you'd expect. Not like the hardest pulling fish, but they just go forever. I mean, you get them to the boat or nearly to the boat, after a good run or two, and you think they're pretty much done, but for whatever reason, they're not done. You're a third of the way through the fight, and they just keep doing these long runs. I guess there's something with the way they process or build up lactic acid in their bodies. They're much more tolerant of that buildup or that sort of thing. But they do fight really, really hard.
Yeah, it's just actually, I was thinking about while we were talking about those as well, the triggerfish. And I remember years back, you'd pull out of a cast because, oh no, it's just a triggerfish. And it's funny how that's come probably the last 4 or 5 years, has become a fish that people are actively targeting in a pretty aggressive way now.
Yeah, totally. I don't know, how that started or why people avoided triggerfish before. But they have so much personality, and they're a great species.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think I've ever caught one and said I've spent most of my time pulling out of them. So it was only on my last saltwater trip we were keen to try and like you say, they're hugely frustrating fish as well.
Yeah, they are. They spook really easily. Their fighting tactics are just awesome. I mean, so they really like to go around heads of coral and saw your line off, or they'll just dive into a hole. I had one fish on my last saltwater trip. This triggerfish, I think it played dead or something like that. I hooked it and I was pulling it in, and it was just floundering, and I just dragged it across the surface. I was trying to figure out what was going on, and as I dragged it back about halfway to me, it bolted straight down into a hole. I couldn't believe it. and so they've got all these. They'll go off a sand flat and break you off on the edge of the flat. They've got these really strong jaws. They'll bite your hook in half pretty much. I mean, a good saltwater hook can get bit in half, or they'll bend hooks. I mean, they've really got it all when it comes to fighting.
Fantastic. One day,
Yeah.
I'll make do and try and catch a salmon at the moment. And just looking out the window, the weather looks about right for it. It's been great talking to you, Peter. Thank you for being so open and telling us about the stuff that you're doing there. It's really, really interesting. And I think it's great for our listeners to get an insight into what actually goes on behind us seeing the rod on the shelf in the fly shop, and getting a sense of the work, the design work and everything else that goes into that. So thank you so much for being a guest and talking to me.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. It was fun. I like talking fishing all the time. So yeah, I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as well. There'll be plenty more soon. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch up with you real soon. Thanks.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.